Good evening, and thank you for joining our 10th webinar of our 12-month series, Enhancing Dementia Care. Our program will be recorded and can be found on our Anthem YouTube channel in the coming week. Please keep your cameras and microphones off until our Q&A portion, at which time you can either type your questions in the chat or raise your hand and we'll unmute you. We are delighted to bring to you a legend in dementia training, Dr. Tam Cummings. Dr. Tam, as she is known in the dementia community, is a practicing gerontologist who has devoted her professional career to educating both professional and family caregivers. In 2009, she founded the Dementia Association with the mission to inspire, educate, and empower dementia caregivers. At Anthem, we utilize her transformative work, including the Itty Bitty Dementia book, in our daily conversations with families of those with dementia. If you have not already received your copy of the Itty Bitty Dementia book, you can find one at your nearest Anthem community. Families, professionals, and caregivers, it's an honor to once again present to you Dr. Tam.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Anthem Memory Care. Thank you, families, for joining. I think this will be a session I hope will help you be able to leave here and really begin to pull together all the things you've been learning and be able to look at your person as a person who is somebody who needs medical care and medical attention, and that you're doing the very best job that you can. So, as I began to look at what we were going to do this week, I decided I wanted to build something new. And I realized as the week started and we got down to today that I really do believe what a little old lady told me once about her belief about God or a higher spirit or a greater power. She told me I could pick whichever one I want, but she said it involves pebbles and boulders. And I asked what she meant, and she said, well, at some point she had read that people think they're alone in the universe and they don't realize that there really is a higher power trying to help you. And I said, well, how does that work with people with dementia? Because it's just such a horrible disease. And she said, well, it starts out with pebbles. And I said, okay, I'm still lost. And she said, pebbles, God will throw something at you and it sort of catches your attention, but you let it go on by. And then you get hit again and again and again, and you keep ignoring what you're supposed to be paying attention to. And then suddenly a big boulder appears to come out of nowhere and just squish you like a bug. And she said, that's when God finally gives up throwing pebbles and starts throwing boulders. So as my week began, my first pebble came on Sunday, and that changed what I decided to the approach that I decided to take with our topic, because this is different than how I've taught this in the past. And so I hope it makes sense. On Sunday, I got a phone call from a lady who said that just the years and years that she had been giving care, she was really starting to feel the toll of. And she found herself wishing this could be over, wishing that her husband of 60 something years would just go to sleep and tonight it would stop. And she felt as though she had been grieving for so long that she'd actually stopped grieving, that it no longer mattered to her whether he woke up today. She just didn't see her husband anymore. She saw a shell of who he was. And at times she found herself very angry with him, Chris. And when she spoke to him, she would speak to him harshly. And every time she said something to him and he didn't answer her, her voice would get louder and she would get more and more agitated. And she was very tearful and very just extremely upset that she had allowed herself to do that. And she found herself wishing more and more, as his disease got worse and worse, that he would just come back to who he was. And what we really discussed and what made me think that one of the communication tips for tonight is not just how do we talk to people who have brain damage, but it's also recognizing the communication that we have to do to each other as caregivers, as professionals providing for family caregivers, as people who are sharing your journey. Everything that that woman wished for while she cried over our Zoom call was normal. It is normal, Chris, to wish that any long-term horrible thing would be over. That's totally normal. I've never met a family who doesn't wish it would be over. It is normal for a family member to feel as though they've done all the grieving they can do. They have finished grieving, and that is very common because and typically at that point, their person has so much brain damage, it truly no longer is the person that they knew and loved. And yet they continue to step up to the plate and be a family. It's normal to be angry. It's normal to be angry at doctors. Chris, you and I both know it's normal to get angry at us. It's normal to get angry at caregivers. It's normal to get angry at family that doesn't help, at friends, family, neighbors, people from church or synagogue that just don't seem to see what you're seeing and instead want to argue with you that there's actually nothing wrong and you're watching it happen right in front of you. And so, uh, normal to be angry. This isn't what retirement was supposed to be like. This isn't what being grandparents or parents was supposed to be like. And it is normal to wish the person you knew could come back. I mean, that to me would be odd not to wish for them to be back to normal. And so everything, any family member, any professional, anybody listening who gets this message, it is normal for you to feel those things. So that was my Sunday, Chris. And then Monday morning, I had a call scheduled with a lady, and as she was talking to me, it turns out that she was married to a 50-year-old man who was, as she described him once, a brilliant man. And she began to tell me his story. And again, I was struck with how important communication was because this woman had written down her husband's medical history for the last 26 years, and they had been married 30. And they had triplets who had graduated college, but the triplets were very, very nervous because some of their father's medical condition they actually shared. They shared a cardiovascular gene with him, which meant they both had been on blood pressure medicine since they were children. And so watching what the disease had done to him was very scary for their children. And he also had additional things that were happening to his brain because of a mental illness that he had been treated for throughout his lifetime. That caused him to have symptoms and to shake and have tremors like somebody with Parkinson's. But there was also very complex and dysfunctional upbringing that involved a tremendous amount of abuse. There was just one horrible cardiovascular event after another. We actually counted in her history, and she did such a wonderful job of communicating in an orderly fashion the things that had happened to him over the last 2.5 decades. And to me, what was remarkable, Chris, was 12 different times his body had tried to die, and 12 different times the doctors had brought him back. And each time his recovery took longer and longer. And each time he got progressively worse. And Chris, the most frightening thing is that when we finished, we had identified 6 separate dementias, and she realized she hadn't been doing care for just a few years, which was how she had seen it. She had actually been doing care for him for more than 2.5 decades, and she was exhausted. Her adult children were terrified that they were going to develop what their father had, although they only shared this one common trait. They did not have his mental illness. They did not have the other things that had happened to him. Um, she was overwhelmed by her grief, by her guilt. She's 48 years old, and this is not what 48 is supposed to be. Frustrated, afraid for her children, afraid that something could happen that would change them, even though they've got medication and they're very careful with their diets and taking care of their bodies. The pain that she felt, the loss of a partner, of a spouse, as he had gotten more and more ill. And so now we're on Monday, Chris. And throughout this whole thing, she was surprised that we were communicating and drawing back from 2.5 decades ago, how that event started a terrible chain reaction that ended up becoming something that was quite horrific. one of his strokes alone had caused him to have the presentation of two separate forms of a totally different type of dementia other than a vascular dementia. So it was really quite complex. And through this all, she had managed to still have a career, still raise her children, get her children through college, and maintain a home in what had been really very, very challenging when you step back and looked at all that she had gone through. And so now, because we've started out like this, I want everybody, we're going to be doing a lot of this tonight. I want everybody to practice your breathing, because I got calls from some of you in the last few months, and I really want to reiterate, you're watching brain damage. You're watching your loved one with a terminal brain disease. Nothing's on purpose. And of course, you get overwhelmed. So part of what we're going to do tonight is practice those techniques, because they really will save you. Your breathing technique is to sit upright with your feet flat on the floor, shut your eyes. Your hands do better. Your circulation is better if your hands are palm up. And you simply breathe in to the count of 4, hold for the count of 2, breathe out to the count of 6, hold for the count of 2. And then you repeat that, Chris, repeat it, repeat it, repeat it. And when you do that enough, Chris, you're meditating. But in just 4 short breaths, you tell your body, you tell your parasympathetic nervous system that no matter what's happening, it's okay. Because all you really have control over is this moment right here. If your loved one's already in Anthem, I want you to do this before you go to visit them. When you stop your car in the parking lot, before you get out, take 4 breaths. When you finish your visit and come back to your car, take 4 breaths before you start back for home. And so tonight we're going to practice. And the reason we do is if you practice it, you're more likely to do it. And remember, the out breath is longer because we want to slow your breathing down. Because when you and I get anxious, when we get nervous, when we start thinking, what if, coulda, woulda, shoulda, our respiration begins to be shorter and tighter. I actually begin to hold my breath when I get anxious. So we have to learn to breathe. I'm going to count for you. Breathe through your nose. Everybody, deep breath in, 2, 3, 4, hold, hold, breathe out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, hold, hold, deep breath in, 2, 3, 4, hold, hold, breathe out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, hold, hold, breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold, hold, breathe out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, hold, hold, breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold, hold, breathe out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, Chris, one of the tricks to doing this breathing technique is to actually put your hand on your abdomen, and you should be breathing deep enough that your hand moves in and out. This is something that's really hard for women to do because we've been told all our lives to suck it in. And so it can be hard for women to breathe a deep abdominal breath. So if you notice your hands not moving, make sure you are breathing deep in your belly to pull in breath to the lower parts of your lung. Didn't know that about women, did you, Chris? Then came the next phone call, Chris. This was my next pebble. And this was a call from a family caregiver who, as we talked, she told me she not only was the caregiver for her mother who had a form of dementia, she had also been the caregiver for her father who was injured in a accident at work. And she had actually been a caregiver since she was 12. And so when we think about communicating with people with dementia, one of the things that we forget is while this little girl began to help in her father's care as a preteen, about 35% of preteens go home from school and help do care for a dementia person, either a grandparent or a parent who has dementia. And so it's not just adults that have to be able to learn to communicate with a person with dementia, but it can also be caregiving children or grandchildren, people who are under the age of a teenager. If you'll go to YouTube or to Google or to the websites, you can find information on talking to teenagers or preteens about a person with dementia that they love. There are a lot of books available now, but it's not just that we have younger people doing care that we may not think about. But for this particular lady, and I know she's not the only one, once the care of her father, once he passed, it became evident that her mother's dementia had suddenly progressed. And so she never stopped giving care to the point now that in her 50s, her whole life, except for her first 12 years, she's been a caregiver to a parent. And that takes a toll on you. So part of your effective communication tips today are you've got to communicate honestly with yourself. And when you do the paperwork in the back of your itty bitty dementia book or the paperwork that's on the bottom of the website under the tool section, those papers are not designed to be filled out and tell you that you probably have depression. It's meant to be filled out and taken to your physician so that they can give you the help and support that you need as you go through this. And it means that for more of you than it scares me to think about. For more of you than I think we realize, you've been doing care for much, much longer than even 10 years. And I mean, Chris, this is something I had not really given that much thought to, but we've got to have a large population of people that are really doing care either for one parent after another parent or for grandparents right into parents, or in the case of this lady, starting with a parent who had been injured in a mechanical accident. And how stressful that is. So you've got to communicate to the people around you, you need help. We know, for example, people won't do things, even especially if it's a parent, unless another parent tells them to. Not ask them to, not hint for them to, but tell them you need help or tell them you need to go visit your loved one. And that's just part of being a parent, I think, Chris. So, stressful stuff. So, Chris, when we get stressed, our parasympathetic nervous system begins to get ready to kick in and fire off adrenaline and cortisol. And so, here's quick way to make that stop. So, Chris, Nicole, everybody out there, put one hand on your forehead, put the other hand over your heart, and shut your eyes and take a deep breath. And, Chris, you should feel an immediate reduction in stress. You should feel, if you're already unstressed, you should feel very calm. That should very quickly calm you down because that connects you to your vagus nerve, which is your eighth cranial nerve, and it's the one that brings more information back to the brain than any of the other nerves. But it connects your brain to your heart, to your stomach, to your upper and lower digestive system. It's the one that gets us all freaked out. By doing this, you tell it everything's okay. Now you can also keep your hand on your forehead and move your other hand down to your stomach. And your stomach is right below your sternum. It's not way down here at the bottom. It's right up here below your sternum. And again, a few deep breaths, and that should make you feel calmer. Did that help, Chris?
It did.
Good answer, Chris. Good answer. I was hoping you'd do that. So then Monday in the early afternoon, I got a phone call from a family member whose family has a genetic familial gene for ALS and behavioral variant FTD. And as I was talking to her, I asked what her ancestry was because, believe it or not, Chris, the largest number of ALS FTD cases come from people with a Finnish background. And so that's allowed for a great breakthrough in studies of being able to identify the gene. But for her, it was frightening. Now, she tested negatively for the gene, but in her own siblings, and she was the baby of the group, but in her own group, she had seen 3 of them already die in their early 50s to early 60s. And as she began to lay out her family tree for me, and again, this was incredible communication because once she began to do this, it helped answer part of the issue she was having. And as she laid out her family tree, in her mother's branch, her mother had 6 siblings, and all 7 of the children had died in their 50s and 60s from ALS and FTD, and from diagnosis to death had been only 3 years on average. She had now gone and built a family tree, and she could see aunts and uncles from that same genetic line of her mother. On the other side, she had some concerns because there was vascular dementia. She was very, very worried about that. And she was frightened because she was frightened not for herself. She had tested negatively. She was frightened for her nieces, her nephews, her great nieces and nephews, because people had already gotten married and had children, because gene research is especially new in this area. And family members that she had tried to talk to and ask them to go get tested so that they could see, maybe was there something that they could help the next generation. They could look at a different way to have children. Maybe it would mean people wouldn't get married. But family members were angry at her. The messenger truly does get shot at. She was worried that she had a sister that was in denial, that would refuse to go for testing. And she was worried because the family had scattered, that maybe she didn't pay enough attention and wasn't realizing this sister was sick. And as she had looked around, it had become aunts and uncles and cousins. And how terrifying. I cannot imagine something so terrifying. And she was doing her best to do support groups and help families who have this same sort of genetic thing going on with them. But Chris, how frightening that you're trying to communicate life-saving information to a family member and they don't want to hear it. And so as I thought about her, it was one more thing where there was another communication that I had never looked at, but families of people with dementia can run into. Monday afternoon, Chris, I got another call from a lady, and she was really, really angry at her husband. She said that her whole identity had been through him. They had known each other always. They'd grown up in the same small town together, and now that so much of him was different, that it was gone, she said she felt like he had abandoned her. Even though he hadn't done it on purpose, she still felt there, and she felt judged by people, because everybody on this call knows there is a stigma that follows your loved one. They social standing that she had had with her husband, she felt like that had been taken away from her, and she had been ghosted by her friends. It wasn't just the abandonment of her husband as her husband and her partner and her best friend and the father and grandfather of her children and her grandchildren. It was friends were gone. And she finally said to me, Chris, she said, he'll finally answer me if I yell about 8 times. Why do you think that is? And I said, well, probably by the 8th time you're screaming. And she said, yes. And I said, has your body language changed then? And she said, oh, yes, I'm fighting mad. And I said, so he's responding to, there's a really mad lady here yelling at me. And then Chris explained it to me quite clearly. And any wives who are watching will fully understand it. She said to me, I had him trained and now he's broken. And she said, I know that sounds terrible. What I'm trying to say is I miss the boy that I'd met in school. Chris, she had known him since the 3rd grade. It had been a 68-year marriage. And she did not like this disease, and she wanted it to stop, and she wanted him to come back. And it took me the better part of 2 hours to where I think she was finally able to reach a point and say, he's just not there anymore, and I need to quit yelling at him. And that was a communication that I never really gave that much thought to, Chris, as to how frustrated a family spouse is, and just the conflicts of marriage, the lifetime of marriage, the spouses talk over each other, spouses act alike, they pick up each other's mannerisms. But to feel like she had him and now he was gone, and that here was another communication in dementia care that I really had sort of missed. And with her, I really tried to stress to her that her approach to her husband of screaming at him and flailing her arms around and raising her voice and the whole facial features that change with that, I really do hope she understood that that was not the right way to approach her husband. People with dementia pick up on your emotion. If you come towards me from the side, from behind, over the top of me, if you scare me and I'm a fighter, I'm going to hit you because my brain isn't working the way your brain is. And so, approach, she promised me from now on, she would come from the front and she would stop screaming. And so, Chris, at this point, we're all probably, these have not been fun stories. This is how my week has been, but I do think I hope it helps. But remember, Greenstone's awesome icebreaker. And this is where you're beginning to feel yourself get so overwhelmed, Chris, that you go to the freezer, grab an ice cube, go to the sink, hold the ice tightly in one hand, shut your eyes, and begin to take slow, deep breaths in through your nose and out through your nose. On about the seventh breath, Chris, you'll drop the ice because your hand is now burning, but your brain should calm itself down because you've done a brain trick to tell it to stop doing what if, and coulda, woulda, shoulda. And you better pay attention to right now because my hand feels funny. By doing that, you trick your brain and it helps you to calm down in those moments when you're really starting to feel yourself get overwhelmed. Now, Chris, yesterday morning, I sort of think a boulder started coming. Yesterday morning, a lady called me, and those of you who have called me, I try to remember to tell you, I speak to a lot of people. I'm probably not going to remember this. So if you need to call me back, I want you to tell me that your mom has vascular dementia, that I told you and your brother and sister to go to a doctor. I told you a special kind of doctor to go to, and I met you in this city. And she called me and she said, I'm one of two sisters and a brother that you met with. And she told me the city we met in. And she said, I'm supposed to tell you my mother has vascular dementia. And you told me and my siblings to see a board certified cardiologist because you wanted to make sure that our cardiovascular systems were good. And she said, I started to call you a month ago, but she said I was about to have the surgery. She said, so 4 weeks later, I thought I would call you today and tell you thank you for telling me that because my mother has a vascular dementia, I need to see a board certified cardiologist. The board certified cardiologist discovered that I have, and Chris, I couldn't even say this word, thoracic aortic aneurysm. And she had open heart surgery and they repaired the damage. And she said she felt wonderful. So, Chris, this is my communication to everybody. If you have a parent or a grandparent with cardiovascular issues or vascular dementia, please see a board certified cardiologist. Board certified in any medical field means that this person was at the top of their class. You want to explain to them you have a family member with vascular dementia and you want to let them check you out. And Chris, I think it's something we forget over and over to tell families because we're doing so many things and we're dealing with people that are frightened and afraid and are watching their loved one and it's just can be overwhelming. But if your loved one has any vascular condition, please see a board certified cardiologist because this is something you can be protected from. And I want to make sure that I get that communication across. And again, Chris, you already know to let me know who you are when you talk to me because I never remember. So then we got to a boulder yesterday, Chris, after the heart boulder, and it was a family on Zoom, and the wife had during COVID gone across the country and scooped her parents out of the home they had lived in for 50 years and brought them back with her to live with her and her husband. And they stayed with them for 2 years. And then the parents decided they wanted to move into an assisted living. And in that time, the mother had passed. And suddenly they realized that the father's dementia not only had dementia, but the dementia was quite progressed. And as we began to speak, she said, well, she had filled out Zaret's burden interview, and Chris, her score was 57. And we tell you to see your doctor if your score is above 40. Her geriatric depression scale score was a 14 out of a 15, and anything over a five or over is a positive sign for depression. So her depression test was at a dangerous level. Her Hamilton anxiety score was between severe and very severe, which means her anxiety is also at a very scary level. Her caregiver grief score was high because of the loss of one parent and then the sudden realization of just how sick the other parent is. She hasn't had time to grieve for one parent, much less the other. And then suddenly, on top of all of this, she and the husband, and he's very attentive to her and he's trying to be very helpful. And every time he interrupts her to correct her that her mother really is incontinent, she gave him that look. And husbands, you know, that look where the wife throws daggers at you and you know, as soon as we hang up the phone, you're going to die. But anyway, he did his best and he gave an honest evaluation of where her mother was. And Chris, now we were talking about how dementia had altered the communication of a marriage. And so I actually was on the phone with them for quite a while. And we went through some options and we went through some options for her. And even though money's not an issue here, she had, because one doctor retired and another doctor moved and it can take forever to get to a new doctor, she didn't actually have a doctor. And so when I left, not when I left, but when we hung up yesterday, we had talked for almost 4 hours, Chris, and it was everything about her grief, about how she now talks to her mother, and we come from the front of them and talk to them, but it was also to set up a care plan for her. As soon as possible, we needed her to get a PCP, and Chris, I want you to know that she had that done by this morning. She's been set up with a trauma counselor to work on the things that are happening there. She and her husband have both been set up with a marriage counselor. I wrote her on email, here is your order for you to take respite. And by respite, I mean you don't need to visit every day. You're messing things up and you're driving yourself into an early grave, literally, and to get into a support group. And so for all of you adult children listening tonight, for all of you spouses, take a picture of this. Feel free to share this care plan and get help for yourself. You've got to realize that this disease can take you if we don't make sure that you understand that. And then Chris, yesterday evening, and after that, I stopped taking phone calls. I've turned my phone off. I haven't talked to anybody all day today. I got a call from somebody who was very emotional and tearful about a father. And this was a father who had always been so strong, had served his country, had been to war, had been exposed to things. We had toxic dementia, we had vascular dementia, we had things that had been caused by his service to our country. And we had adult children who seriously needed to take a break. Sometimes, if you need to, call Chris. He'll tell you to take a break. Call me, send me a message. I'll send you a message back saying, take a break. Call us. We'll tell you, take a break. You need respite breaks. And if you can't think of any other way to do care through respite care. Let Anthem step up and take care of your loved one for a month while you get your feet back up under you. She was exhausted. Her brother was exhausted. The other brother was exhausted. These three had truly been trying to share care, but because she lived 20 minutes closer in a big city, it really had begun to just fall on her over and over and over again. So you got to keep talking about what it is and what the reality is, Chris. So the trauma for the folks that are here tonight that will see this later is that in cancer, 34% of cancers are terminal illnesses and they get great support. 100% of dementias are terminal illnesses and there are no support. A lot of you have been doing care for decades. And because of that, you may have fallen into where you're yelling at him 8 times and then he finally answers. So he must be faking it. He's not faking it. You finally scared him. You may not have had any professional help until you found Anthem, until you found this education series. And then on top of all of that is the fear for yourself. Now, understand the lady who I talked about genetically, that is super, super rare, very, very rare, 5 to 10% of all those cases. And those are very rare cases, but still normal to be afraid for yourself. So Chris, as always, want to make sure everybody understands, if you walk in a room, don't remember what you went in there for, that is not dementia. If you can't remember that good looking actor's name or face, but you can see it, you can feel it. You saw the movie last night, and in the middle of the night, you yell out that person's name. It's just how you stored it. If you're a grandparent, the only way you can say your grandchildren is to call them out one by one and start at the top and go down. All normal brain function. If you can no longer remember phone numbers, that has now become normal brain function because we're not using our brain like we used to. If you're truly worried about yourself, one of the features is that you're actually worried your brain's not working correctly. And if that is happening, I encourage you to call Anthem and ask who in your area, who in your region does the dementia testing. And the reason is, Chris, there's 100 common things that can make a person feel as though they're not cognitively alert and aware. The number one thing of those is depression. And we now know that untreated depression actually becomes Alzheimer's. We just don't understand why. So it is normal for everybody to feel everything that you're feeling. And just take a deep breath. It is absolutely true. Everything that you have thought, your loved one is gone. That person looks like them, but that's not the mother you grew up with. That's not the husband or the wife that you've had. They don't come back to us. There are sudden moments of suddenly an awareness that is there for a few seconds and then gone. And always, always write those down because they become fewer and fewer. And you're absolutely right, Chris. This disease sucks. It is horrible. I cannot think of anything worse. It is normal that you hurt mentally, physically, that your heart aches. Of course you grieve. And nobody gets to tell you how to grieve. The way you grieve is very personal. Some people, a lot of tears, a lot of wailing, a lot of flailing around. Other people, it's much more internal. It's a more quiet and secret thing, even. But you always have to ask yourself the things that we ask you. And we don't ask you this out of meanness. We ask you this out of care. Would your loved one be happy if they could communicate back to you tonight and would know how exhausted you are? Or how much you worry about feelings of guilt that you suddenly feel yourself swept up with because no one gave you the answers to this disease. And why didn't they? And because you just don't feel you're not taking care of yourself. Would they really be happy with what you're doing? And always, if something happens to you, who will be next? So remember always, these are terrible terminal progressive disease. Most Americans are not properly diagnosed and are not correctly staged in the disease process. What makes us who you are, what makes me who I am, what makes Chris unique is our brain, and our brain runs the body. One of the things families say to me is, he's so healthy. No, he's not. The brain runs the body. It just hasn't caught up to the body yet, but it will. I had a lady tell me last week he's a healthy eater. Is he a healthy eater, Chris, or is he actually hyper oral and he's putting anything in his mouth? It is normal for you, the family member, not to see the decline in your loved one, especially if you're looking at them every day. The lady that I saw yesterday that ended up needing a doctor, she was seeing her mother every day and she couldn't see the changes, but her husband could. And when he would try to share with her what he was seeing, she took it personally, and it's not personal. We're trying to give you professional advice, professional opinions, because dementia is what we do. And if you're at this point where you're needing information, there's probably a good chance you need to go see your doctor. We know that that's a critical thing for you. So as you go through and you think about communicating with your loved one and you find yourself starting to get frustrated, remember, it's all brain damage. The reason we don't quiz them, brain damage. The reason they don't hear us or see us is brain damage. The reason they say or do whatever they think out loud is brain damage. And this is what dementias do to a brain. They destroy it. And that's what's happening. And so as you think about communicating with your loved one, Chris, I'm not saying hand me the clicker and let's go to Netflix. I'm trying to think of where is my mother now looking for a TV, and is she happy to just watch the big screen TV? Or do I need to be aware that that big screen TV may need to be a small screen because the big screen is too lifelike? People are life sized on a big screen, and maybe I need to get mama a smaller screen. As I think about my loved one, every bit of interaction between humans is communication. So if my mother's looking for a phone, Chris, and the disease is well advanced, she has no idea what an iPhone is or why I keep handing her this little flat thing that flips open. She's looking for that phone that hung on the wall. She's looking for that phone that had a handle that had a cord on it that went to a desk set. And if you're in a community or your loved one is a centenarian, somebody over 100, they may be actually looking for that candlestick phone. So every interaction is an attempt by us to communicate. And remember, 90% of communication is body language and your tone and pitch of voice. You get to be in their life in a way that's different. If you can hold yourself during this disease process, they're going backwards in time. So as they go further and further back, I can't talk to my mother about today and reality, but I can learn what it was like for her as a young teenager. I can learn what it was like for her growing up on a ranch. I can learn things that I didn't know that are now my own treasured memories because I understood to ask the right questions for the right time rather than trying to make my mother be in my time. Their world doesn't make sense to them. And even though you and I look at an outhouse and go, ooh, I grew up in a church that had an outhouse. And my mother didn't have indoor plumbing until she was a senior in high school. And we didn't have indoor plumbing across the whole US until the mid 1970s. So things that our generation, the people below us, the younger folks take for granted, it didn't exist. And so my mother may be looking for an outhouse rather than a bathroom that you and I would look for. She may be looking for a foot tub, a wash tub to take a bath in, and not being able to find one of those. She may just use a washcloth and try to bathe herself wherever she can find water. So remember that even as they go backwards in time, and even as my mother still begins to not know who I am, what my mother does know is I'm a nice, friendly person, and I always come with a donut, a piece of pie, a cookie, some chocolate. I come with a sweet treat. And if my mother was diabetic, I'd come with a diabetic treat. But I'm always going to be pleasant, and I'm always going to be trying to figure out where is she right now and how can I best interact with her. And sometimes the best way to interact, Chris, is to ask your loved one if they would like you to pray with them, to ask your loved one if they would like you to sing with them, because singing is usually still available until much later, till the very end of the disease. So you can look for some things to do, but we're not going to criticize, we're not going to correct. And that's a big part of communication. No correction, no criticism, no shaming. We always approach from the front because we understand the changes that are occurring in vision. We have to remember that depression, pain, and anxiety are communication. It's just that they look different. They're not pleasant. And all our lives, Chris, you're a man, you've been it's been pounded into you to never admit you're in pain. Well, this generation didn't admit they were in pain because we had no pain medication for them. So nobody cared. So stop whining. And that's the same thing that's been passed down even today. So their behaviors tell us they're in pain. And that's a very clear communication. Anosognosia is the inability of a person with dementia to realize their brain is damaged. So don't argue with them. They have no idea why you are. You've got to remember the things we can do, Chris. We can live in their reality. I can be in the 1970s and I can be my mother's mother. We can be where they are. We're not lying to them. We're using empathy. I recognize that this person has brain damage. And if I tried to get real with them, it would scare them. And I don't want to do that. So I'm using my empathy skills. And I'm always remembering that the brain runs the body. What we have to do is we've got to teach everybody to stop quizzing people with dementia. They have brain damage. Chris, you and I don't like it when someone comes to a party and says, "Hey, do you remember who I am?" And no, I don't. But now I feel embarrassed and my brain's freaking out trying to remember who you are. Be the nice person that shows up with donuts. It's a much better memory for you to have down the road. Remember, remember that memory is your ability to retrieve, recall, and store information. Most of the time, you've realized something was wrong because short-term memory began to fail. But at the same time, you realized while mom can't remember what we just talked about, she seems to remember 1960 really well. And that's because she's now lost sensory memory. She's got brain damage and has lost the ability to make new long-term memory or short-term memory. And she's now using these other forms of memory as a way to compensate when she's around people. Remember to think of every memory you have as being a file, and your loved ones' files are being destroyed. They're being stolen away from them. And remember, we have people who have shameful events that they may never have talked about before. And we're not going to shame them anymore. We're just going to support them through the emotion. So a big piece of communication, Chris, is we support and respond to the emotion of the statement, not to the statement. I had somebody this week wanted me to talk to a family member because a granddaughter who is a elementary student doesn't want grandma to move into care, but and the family is allowing a child to make a serious medical decision rather than having that difficult conversation with the family member. So remember, you're not doing a bad thing. You're helping someone whose brain is being destroyed. And as it's being destroyed, memory is being destroyed. And that means I could give away all my money. I could let bad people in my house. I could sign checks to bad people. I could do all sorts of things that are hurtful or harmful to myself or others. And all of that is part of the disease. You have to remember how complex the files are and not get frustrated because today they knew banana and tomorrow they don't. It's not on purpose. You have thousands or millions of files on banana, everything from bananas a fruit to monkeys like banana to there was a show called The Monkeys and they acted bananas. Now banana also means crazy. Banana is also a color. Banana was a bicycle seat name. So you have so many files on one single little piece of fruit. How many files do you think you have on mama? If you're Catholic, you have a whole other set of files on daddy, on your sisters or your brothers, your cousins, family members, grandparents. How about candy? How many kinds of candy are they? I've also got a niece named Candy. There's also other things. So it is millions or trillions of files that exist, and pathways get lost, then another pathway gets found, a piece of a file suddenly connects, but then eventually it's all gone. It's just happening because of the disease process. Remember that memory in most people is going to go from infancy to adulthood. And then as Alzheimer's removes it, as the dementia removes it, they go from adulthood back to infancy. They're looking to go home. And home is not a physical, tangible place. It's these things, the things that make your bedroom so comfy, the things that make you feel a sense of safety. And those are the things like art, family pictures, your favorite chair. Those are the things that make your house feel like a home. Vision changes, hearing changes, taste and smell change to only wanting to or being able to taste and smell sweet things. Touch changes to something called pilling or rubbing. It can actually become an anxiety thing where they pick and tear at their skin. Vision changes occur to where there can even be blindness in the left eye. Hearing changes occur to where the person can't translate sound, can't translate language, can't follow sound, definitely can't hear higher pitches, but can still hear lower pitches. And then you've got to remember, it's not these, it's brain damage. and they're eventually going to throw these away. And Chris knows that, Cole knows that, I know that, we all know that. It's not the hearing aids, it's brain damage that's stopping them from hearing and responding. It's not the eyeglasses. It's damage in the occipital lobes. It's brain damage that stops them from being able to see things clearly. And those vision changes include a change in vision to where a loss of peripheral, then a loss of visual. And this, Chris, you notice because the person turns their head to the side. This you notice because they reach across the table for someone else's food. That's usually communication of I see something sweet and I want something sweet. It becomes this periscope vision is reaching. It becomes binocular. And then for some people in stage 6, it actually becomes blind in the left eye, not because I need glasses, but because of brain damage over here. And so that affects how movement feels to us. Changes in how your loved one smells or takes care of themselves, that's not their nose acting up, it's brain damage. It's not them not forgetting. Them wanting sweets is not them misbehaving, it's brain damage. And then 2 of the senses we forget about, Chris, and these are actually big in our field because everybody wants us to make their loved ones stop falling, and we can't do this. This is brain damage. And so we forget that there are some other senses that we don't talk about. Vestibular is your sense of balance. And after the age of 32, we all begin to lose our ability to maintain balance. And that's why it's important that you do balance exercises as you age, because it helps you not to have a fall risk. But for people with dementia, this is now at jeopardy because of brain damage. And then proprioceptive tells you where your body parts are without looking. That's why the doctor says shut your eyes and touch your nose with the tip of your finger. They're measuring one of your skill senses as to what you're able to do. And in people with dementia, what this means is they trip over their own feet. They fall down. If you talk to a professional caregiver, they'll tell you they've caught somebody hundreds of times during their career. So stop what you're doing because it's not helpful. When you're talking to your loved one, come from the front, lower your voice if you can, respect where they are in the disease, stop quizzing them, don't argue with them. These are not teaching moments. They're not shaming moments. We don't, no, you know better than that. We don't do that. These are adults with brain damage. Correcting, trying to force reality on them, you're not going to get a good reaction from that. You're going to get pushback because this is brain damage. And if you embarrass me, I still feel embarrassed. It's just now I don't have the frontal temporal or the frontal lobe that will stop me from telling you what I think about you in public in a loud voice. It's all brain damage. It's not happening on purpose. So as you think about changes in the senses, and as you think about how those senses drive how we approach people, how we talk to people, how we make sure we're in their visual field, how we recognize that we have to arrange furniture special so that they don't trip and fall over stuff, that we have to be careful about things with your loved one that you've never even considered because this isn't your field. But things that you can do that are helpful, kind, gentle voices. Sweet treats. Be that nice person that comes and brings me something yummy. And it will help you and it will help your loved one as they continue to go through the disease. Remember, movement is different. It's 1 step per second. And when a person with dementia tells you slow down, that's clear communication that means slow down. You're going too fast. We move 1 step per second. And by moving somebody too quickly, the communication is I change their blood pressure, I make them more likely to fight, freeze, fawn, or freeze, fawn, or run away, flee. And it can be very scary to them. So go slower in all of your movement. Remember your 9 most common dementias. Alzheimer's is the person that starts repeating. Vascular dementia, holes in the memory, seems normal, begins to sleep more, can be more agitated, more physically and verbally agitated and aggressive with others. Lewy body dementia may be having those hallucinations, especially the one that you their caregiver, their loved one, is actually being a person who's not being faithful to them, and they accuse you of having sex in public. It's part of the disease, even though I know it really hurts. The FTDs, one whole category, are communication disorders. So we have to change and understand how this person is interacting with us, how their brain is taking in information. Parkinson's, similar to Lewy bodies. Wernicke-Korsakoff, we have trouble with this because they're more impulsive because of what alcohol did to their brain. Huntington's, the person can become psychotic. This is normal. And so that changes that we approach, as always, slowly. We've got to give damaged brains a moment to see us and process that we're getting closer to them, not move quickly, but slowly. And then CTE, the football dementia, those dementias we don't know that much about yet, but we know that, like all the others, approach from the front, slow, lower voice, speak more slowly, repeat, repeat, repeat. Don't string long sentences together. Don't talk for 2 hours like I can. Short sentences, and keep your eyes on your person's eyes to see if they're following what you're doing. On stage 4, this is when adult children typically notice that something is wrong. You've now realized that you're starting to fill in blanks for your person, especially if they go to the doctor. They look to you for help with pleading in their eyes, and that tugs at your heartstrings. They now need help with stories. You've got to forgive them for pieces that are forgotten. They're not lying. They're doing a brain thing called confabulation, where the brain's mixing stuff together because it's finding holes in the files. And they're beginning to greatly change from the person that you knew. In stage 5, brain loss is now significant. Short-term memory issues are now apparent. They get lost. So a lot of times, Chris, a family doesn't realize something's wrong till they go on a cruise or a trip or a vacation somewhere, and they take their person someplace new, and it does not work out well. Stage 5, the communication is frequently sprinkled with accusing the caregivers of theft or doing something else to them. And it's because they don't understand why we're doing what we're doing, that you've made a medical decision and we're carrying out the work and the socialization. And then one of the big ones, Chris, you hear about it all the time. I heard about it multiple times this week, is that for a long time, no one recognized anything was wrong because of the person's wonderful use of social skills. Hi, how are you? Oh, I'm fine. How are you? And the person's innate sense of humor. And instead of family members realizing that they were witnessing dementia, they just thought they're funny and look at how polite they are. Everything's okay. And that's very difficult for families. Late stage 7 is now very severe dementia. This person is now totally reliant upon others for care. There's difficulty with eating and swallowing. We use the first name now with a lot of positive praise throughout every caregiving event, every interaction with them, because this is the thing they're most commonly going to remember. And I just realized, Chris, stage 6 got moved accidentally. So stage 6, which comes before stage 7, but after stage 5, this is called severe dementia. This is when your loved one does finally look physically sick. Cursing and singing are normal here because of how the brain moves. They are colder than you and I are. They are beginning to be more challenging because they don't understand why we're doing the care that needs to be done. And so that's why we move so slowly. That's why we want you to move slowly. That's why we use treats. That's why we use their first names. That's why we sing as a way to communicate while we're doing intimate care, because it distracts the person and allows us to get a bath done without too much agitation or toileting or changing any of the other activities of daily living that we have to do. And then, Chris, we're at the end. So everybody can just take a deep breath, because I know that was a lot of stuff. So approach always from the front. Even if I get up and leave, I come back, I still come from the front. Always slow down. Always put yourself where they are in their time and their reality. Don't try to teach them. Don't fuss at them. Don't shame them. Cursing and singing are normal. We hear it all the time. We're not offended. You don't need to be offended. It's not God. It's the brain disease. And then the senses are damaged. And after that damage comes massive loss of body tissue. And that is the progression of the disease. So 90% of our communication is my body language, my smile, my tone of voice. And I'm going to give 5% to a donut, Chris. And I'm always going to approach from the front, always going slow. I repeat, repeat, repeat. Okay, Chris, did that make sense?
That does make sense. Yes.
Gosh, I hope so. I built this today and I practiced it twice before I got to it. So I hope it all made sense. So does anybody have any question?
If you have a question, let us know. You can put it in the chat if you would prefer to do that. We want to make sure we get your question and give Dr. Tam a chance to respond.
That's how good I was, Jamie. Nobody has a question. Seriously, nobody has a question?
We have Ron. Let me allow his mic. Ron, go ahead.
Did y'all go away?
Are you able to use your mic?
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
You are.
Okay. Your book, what's it called? Itty Bitty Dementia book is really, really excellent. I found another book. I just want to know from your professional experience, if you've heard of the book, The 36-Hour Day, and if that can be helpful as well. I got it for free, so I haven't read much of it, but just wanted, from your professional point of view, could that be helpful as well and help me understand and care for my wife?
It is considered one of the classic books of dementia. We actually had to read it during graduate school. I found it to be one of the most difficult and challenging books on dementia I'd read. It is really challenging to read. It can be very hard. It can feel overwhelming. So just take it easy. It is one of the best known books. It's one of the first ones out. They continually update it. He's a great doctor. She's wonderful at what she does. You can still hear him speak around the country from time to time. But it is a good book, but it is a hard read.
Mhm.
It is a very hard read. And what it's talking about, the term 36-hour day, we look as being a stage 6 behavior, because that's where the person begins to lose weight, and they lose weight because their body now goes into movement for 36 hours a day or longer. And you and I can't do that. And so that's where the name came from, but it is one of the classics. Just, it's not a beach book. Don't take it to the beach.
Thank you.
But an excellent book.
Okay, we have Kelly Blades. Kelly, your mic should be, you can unmute your mic.
Me?
Yeah.
Okay, so first I want to say we are having a small watch party tonight, watching you, and we love you and appreciate all your insight, and thank you for sharing everything with us. And also, we are in Wichita, Kansas, and looking forward to seeing you soon. So we're excited. Then I am curious to know about you said something about I think at the latter stages, loss of tissue. What does that entail?
As
Body
each,
tissue.
as each, in the body, the normal body weight loss in dementia is in stage 6. The person's body is now affected by the brain damage due to the extensive amount of brain damage. And so it is normal for a person to lose between 1/3 and 1/2 of their body weight. And so the change is quite dramatic. A lot of times family members because of emotion. You may not even see it in your loved one until about 5 years after their death. You find that you can finally look at their picture and realize how ill they were. For the professional caregiving staff, because they are doing intimate care, they're very aware of what the disease is doing to the physicality of the body. So the body is just stripped of its tissue. Part of it is due to the amount of movement that they do in stage 6 of the disease. When we've done tests on people in dementia communities, it's not unusual for somebody to walk 20 miles a day. And we get very nervous. We'll get them, sit them down, and then they pop right back up and off they go again. And that's a normal part of the disease that will occur. So that's what we mean when we say there's massive muscle tissue loss in stage 6 of the disease.
Okay, thank you. And then something else I wanted to ask about. Something that I have been telling people. And then something that you said tonight made me realize that maybe I'm really wrong about this. But I keep saying, my husband has plateaued, and it's been 8 years now, and he has frontotemporal dementia, and he's very, I think, functional. He stays by himself at home while I work each day. He was diagnosed at the age of 52. He's now 60. And I saw a rapid decline at first, the first 3 years. And then it, to me, has plateaued, but it's declining, but slower. And I'm wondering if I am just not seeing, since I'm with him every day.
It can be that. It can also be the effects of cognitive reserve. So was your husband a smart man or a highly educated man?
He was highly intelligent. I didn't have to remember anything because I could rely on his memory.
Okay, so a very analytical brain.
Yes.
Okay, so the testing materials in dementia are made for the IQ of 100 because that's the average IQ. But just for the sake of tonight, let's say your husband's IQ was 150. He had to have massive brain damage loss before somebody began to notice something was wrong with him.
Yes.
Right? Because the analytical brain is able to slow the process down. We don't understand why, but it is somehow because of how the structures of the brain we think work in people of that intelligence, that their brain has such capacity that pieces of the brain that are weaker die first. But then when it finally hits stage 5, the disease appears to speed up. And so what you're describing with your husband in a frontal temporal dementia is not unusual, but it can also be that as I've sat and looked at it for 10 years now, I'm not seeing it the same way, say, Chris would see it or I would see it. And so you can use the FTD staging tool. That'll sort of help you because it's there in black and white. And just go down the left-hand column of the tool and put an X next to every behavior you see until you don't see behaviors anymore. And that'll help you realize where he actually is now. Another technique is to go back, Kelly, and take on your phone, look up pictures of him over the last several years, blow it up to where it's just the frame is him, then click the picture again so they'll line up at the end of your slide. And then you can go look at picture over year. And what you'll typically realize, especially with FTD, is that you were smiling in that picture, but he really wasn't. And you never realized it until you actually went back and looked. And so you may be able to see the change that way. The other way is to use your staging tool and talk to Steve at Anthem there in Wichita, because he can help you look at your loved one as a more objective person.
Yes, thank you.
But normal to see that plateau, especially in people of super intelligence. That's a normal thing. Okay.
Thank you.
Very interesting. We have another Kelly Blades.
I thought that was Kelly Blades.
That was me. I had 2 different things. I was saying I got them all in there. So
okay, good. Great. We don't want to miss anybody. All right. And then we have a Rachel. Rachel has a hand up. Rachel, you should be able to use your mic now. Right, how about Valerie?
While they're coming on, I might just mention I'm seeing things come through the chat.
Oh, thank you. The question from Sherry is, even if a person is working out several times a week, will they still have the loss of the weight in the tissue?
Oh, yeah. And the working out of the person, I've seen somebody with FTD, for example, behavioral variant, run like an athlete until all of a sudden he couldn't walk right anymore. So you can see sudden, very quick declines in someone. And then you're going to have to run the question by me again. Sorry.
Oh, that was the question. If they would still have experienced that weight loss and loss of
Yeah,
tissue.
they are still going to. And I think that's part of what's so difficult for family members with someone with dementia, is because you and I are accustomed to looking at a person and judging their health by how they look out here. And we didn't make the connection that this thing in here tells all this out here how to work. And it tells the body how to function, how to run correctly. And so it does everything from telling the heart to beat to telling the lungs to breathe, telling the body how to fight infection. And so as it becomes more and more damaged, it eventually catches up to the person. And when we expect to see the broken bone, when we expect to see the vision loss, when we expect to see the weight loss, all happens in stage 6, because stage 6 is where there is so much brain damage.
There's a really good question in the chat, and we do hear this question quite a bit at Anthem. This person is saying that they want to keep taking the individual out, but it just disorients him, and he seems to want to stay in the same routine. Is it good or bad to get him out of his routine?
You have to realize how powerful your brain is. You know, Jamie, when you're traveling and you're going in and out of hotels and in and out of airports and you're having to do all the things you have to do, you have a full 3-pound brain. So your brain filters out all of that activity around it and focuses on, I'm at DFW, I got to get on the Skylink and I got to get off at Terminal B, and then I got to find gate 38. A person with dementia can't do that anymore. And so it's scaring them. Somebody who used to love to go out to restaurants are not quiet places. They are loud, noisy places. Restaurant people even have a saying that really good night in the restaurant doesn't start until dishes break. And so now you hear people cursing in nice restaurants. That's become part of our lexicon now. You hear noise. Their brain can't filter that. And so what used to be fun for them isn't fun anymore. When you get on a street and go for a drive, you pick them up and take them out. I'm out in the middle of nowhere, and I wouldn't drive a person with dementia just because the movement, as we go down even a dirt road, the movement is too much for their brain to be able to process. And I end up scaring the person rather than doing something with them that they used to enjoy. So when the staff begins to report it, when the person comes back and they're agitated, it's not fun anymore. It's something you're doing for you, not for them. So if they liked eating out, bring their favorite meal there and cut it up for them and help them. And don't fuss at them and don't be mad. It's just the normal progression of the disease. But it's because the damaged brain can't filter all the things around it that your brain automatically does and my brain automatically does. And so because of that, the world becomes a loud, noisy, scary place, and it's not fun.
All right. And we have another great question. Are there any dementias outside of Lewy bodies where an individual may hallucinate seeing bugs?
No, they pretty much own that one. Parkinson's may report bugs, but Parkinson's is a variant of Lewy bodies. So the bug, spiders, rats, or snakes, they're sort of primitive brain things that you and I are scared of. And it is usually only seen in Lewy body dementia.
Okay. And then Lori asks, do you have suggestions for talking with a family member on the phone? I'm assuming a family member who has dementia. Any?
Oh, you just want to be happy. You want to accept that they probably don't know who you are. They're just being polite and social back to you. Keep the conversation going. Keep it light. If they ask, where is mama? Mama's gone to the store. She'll probably be back later. Really hot today. Made sure I drank a lot of water. Hope you drank a lot of water. Did you drink a lot of water? I bet you did. So I'm having a conversation with myself with them. To fill in the blanks, but you can, what we have FaceTime now, Zoom calls, so we can do stuff and to give you more of an in-person, but I think any contact is still good contact.
Yeah.
Right. And if your person's in, Anthem, the staff's going to help them FaceTime with their family member.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
So, I mean,
That's right.
technology gives us some great things.
Diane has a couple of questions. She said, you mentioned at the beginning about trauma. How much might that contribute to dementia?
In the case of this gentleman, the trauma was that he was severely physically abused pretty much on a daily basis, and the abuse contained a lot of head strikes and a lot of head injuries. And so it was his presentation was almost like CTE because he'd had that much brain trauma from being picked on and being beaten up, not only at home, but also at school.
Okay. This also comes from Diane. She says, my grown children think home care is what I need, but I desperately need respite and memory care. I have been dealing with my husband's memory issues since 2014. Any
Oh,
encouragement
you definitely need respite and memory care. Yeah. Reach out to your Anthem person and let them help you. Feel free to call me. I'll be glad to tell your grandchildren. Feel free to come sit in your shoes for a couple of weeks and see what that's like. But they're your grandchildren and you're their grandmother. And believe it or not, we are scared of you till my final day. So put your foot down. This is what you have to do. We cannot let people not doing the care try to make the medical decision for you. And what they're not realizing is they're putting at risk both their grandparents, and it's not their decision to make. You know, you have done your due diligence. So reach out to your Anthem person and let them help you. They will set up a meeting with a family. They'll set up a Zoom meeting with me and your grandchildren. So let us help you, but don't you back down to them. Be tough.
That was probably my Missouri twang, but she did say her grown children, but I think your answer is still the same.
Still the same. Yeah. And I mean, Jamie, Nicole, Chris, how many times do we have the family caregiver being pushed around and basically abused by family members that aren't doing a single thing to help with care?
Yeah.
And that's not fair and that's not right. They don't understand what you've done for the last 10 years, but I do. And Jamie does, Chris does, Nicole does, everybody in the communities do. You've got to take care of you, and your loved one would not be happy to know that you're letting children tell you what to do. And even more afraid than grandchildren. I mean, I don't know about you, Nicole, but I'm still afraid of my parents, Chris, Jamie. I mean, all of us, we're still afraid. And so you just put your foot down and tell them this is what it is. And if they don't want to be part of it, then, their loss. It truly is their loss because you have gone above and beyond. So let us help you.
Yeah, and there's a big difference between home care and memory care in a community setting, and we can probably help understand those differences as well.
Well, but the home care is not licensed. They're not trained. They're basically nice people. And what we see most of them doing is sitting on their telephones And so I have walked in on home health people because I have a contract with the federal government to do stuff in homes. And I've walked in and everything they were supposed to be doing was not done. The resident was not dressed. There was no food being prepared in the dirty kitchen, but she was on her phone. And that is something we see everywhere. They're not trained to do care with dementia. They're not trained to do activities and socialization. And that is the big thing is that Anthem brings a medical social model to care. And the medical part is the doctors come there, the podiatrist comes there, the dentist comes there, everybody comes there. The nurses are there 24 hours a day. And the social model is there are activities going on because we know we don't understand it. We assume it's humans. Humans do better around more humans with this disease. And it is the socialization that is critical because the only thing we can give people at the end is to make sure they're in a happy, fun environment. And you can't get that with home health people.
And that may have helped Kelly Gilroy with her question, but she did say, any tips on communicating with family and friends who do not think that this patient should be in a facility?
You know, Jamie, I actually had a lady once that showed up at her daughter's with her father and a suitcase and said, he's yours for the week. Here's his medicine and a list of what he likes. And she parked dad, handed the daughter the suitcase, hopped in her car, and away she went. And so I have seen people go to that sort of extreme of how else to get their attention. The other thing is people get MRIs and don't understand how to read them. They get summaries from the physician and don't understand how to read them. They've not been given staging tools to be able to do their own staging. Some people really don't get it. They're just sort of oblivious to everything, and we do see that. Others need education and you need support, and we're here to do that and to help you get that.
Yeah, that's right. And Diane followed up to say thank you. She's trying to get her grown children to watch your videos. So
so Diane, one thing I see a lot at conferences is whoopsie. I just made it go the wrong way. One thing I see at conferences is families will bring their mother, hoping that their mother will listen to me and go, I have that. I need to go with you kids to the lawyer and the bank, and we need to go pick out and blah, 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 blah. And instead, what happens is their mother looks at them and goes, my neighbor has that. I'm going to keep my eyes on her. So, bring a horse to water. But if we can set up a meeting, we would have everybody call me doctor because that helps. Okay, to hear it from a professional and to make them aware of your own health being in jeopardy. But you've got to take care of you because he would tell you to do that.
Thank you. And Rachel was trying to get off of her mic, but she typed in, I'm a nurse who works with dementia patients. My father-in-law is stage 7. My mom, after my request, was recently tested and diagnosed with dementia stage between 4 and 5, leaning 5. My father refuses to accept this fact and constantly corrects mom and doesn't believe me that my mom has brain damage. Any suggestions?
Well, Dad couldn't be in stage 7 because he wouldn't be talking. He'd be bedbound. So I may have misunderstood that. I think
my father-in-law, so I have a lot of experience because not only do I work with dementia patients at my job, but my father-in-law who lives here with us is in stage 7. And then my mother this year, so he's had it for 5 years. Now my mother this year was just diagnosed, and my own father is like, no, you don't know.
Two dads. Okay, two dads. Okay, got it. So here's the hard part. Is your dad behaving the way he's behaving because no one's looked at him to see if something's wrong with him? Is your dad behaving the way he's behaving because he's angry that he can't make your mom behave the way she behaved before? Was their relationship a good relationship? Was he very authoritative with her? But sometimes, and especially as professionals, we can miss it, especially in our own house. It can be that we're seeing a lot of anger and frustration from one parent, and it's that they have dementia too. It's just not as advanced. And so think back on your own career. How many times have you seen somebody whose dementia is not as advanced as a further advanced person be ugly to that person and be rude to them and condescending to them? And so you could be dealing with multiple things here. Your mom's dementia, what your parents' marriage was like, how did he normally treat your mom? Is your dad actually acting differently? Because what can happen, and you see this in your career, is everybody gets focused on the parent who's obviously ill, and we sort of quit looking at the other one because they seem to be okay. And it's not until the first one dies that we realize the other one was actually very sick too. And it can be especially hard. I mean, I can't imagine your stress levels. You've got somebody at home with you, you've got work that you do all day long, and now you've got a mother diagnosed, and that just must be horrible, just overwhelming, I would think. And so maybe ask a colleague to look at your dad, just, because all the tools are observational. So if we know what we're looking for, we can sort of eyeball your dad and see if there's something else going on with him. Or was this how their relationship was, and now it's just exacerbated because mom doesn't follow the rules anymore? Does that make sense?
Yeah, they actually had a pretty decent marriage. My mom always took care of my dad 100% though, like when he was home. And so I don't think he understands how to care for her, and he's constantly having trouble. And unfortunately, he lives 8 hours away from me. So I just come in every month and try to do the best I can to prop up both of them.
Sure. Well, when you go back next time, and even before you go back, do the picture trick of looking at pictures of your dad over the last several years and not just your mom. And then be a nurse, look at him medically. Okay, do a finger grip test and have him squeeze your fingers to see if is there a possibility there's been a stroke that no one's noticed, and just look at your itty bitty book and see if you can narrow down, if dad had something, what would it be? And so I'd be looking at, was he a smoker? Do we have any cardiovascular issues? Because people with vascular dementia tend to be more agitated, but you could also be having a husband having the same reaction that wife was of, I had that man fully trained and now he's broken and I want you to fix him. It could be that he's had a wife that's doted on him and now she's not doting and wears his slippers. So, you have something probably pretty complex, or dad's beginning to develop a dementia and just doesn't understand it.
Thank you.
And also, you see it in couples that have been married forever because they just interact differently with one another. So it could be any number of things. And next time you're over there, eyeball the medicine, because I always make sure I count what medicine is in what everything. And sometimes you can figure out stuff that way, but just use your critical nurse eye and start at the front door as you go in and look to see what seems different that dad should be in charge of. And then just how is he looking? Is he really clean shaven, or is he starting to have places where he misses and he's a little scruffy? So just use your nursing, and then, drag along a colleague. Sure, it's 8 hours, but you can trick them into believing it's a fun road trip and get somebody else to look at him, or take a video of him and send it to me.
All right, I don't see any other questions in our chat. Anyone else that has an unanswered question before we wrap?
Can I ask
Valerie?
a question?
Oh.
Yes.
Yeah, I know it doesn't sound like Valerie, but it's Valerie.
Okay, Valerie, that doesn't sound like Valerie.
We're a husband and wife team, and this has been excellent. I got a 3-part question, but it's going to be quick. So you've talked a lot about, and we've noticed in interaction with people, that they'll sometimes think you are somebody that you're not.
Right.
What stage does that typically occur?
That's usually a late stage 5, beginning stage 6 behavior.
And so, and in this last response you gave to the last person that asked the question, you said, let's trick them into a road trip. It's okay.
No, I meant trick. I meant trick her nurse friend into a road trip
Oh.
to help her look at her
Okay.
at her father more objectively. I didn't mean trick mom into her. No, let's not trick anybody into a road trip. No,
No,
I'm
no,
sorry.
no. And it's not so much the road trip, but it is the going along with the idea that you are somebody that you're not. And it seems that we're interested in reducing agitation. Reduce agitation, reduce conflict, have as good a time as you possibly can with the person at the moment that they are in.
Right?
Am I hearing you right?
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay. I think I understood you right. But yeah, to reduce conflict, anytime I see something that looks agitating, Valerie, the first thing I'm always going to do is check my pain assessment in advanced dementia, because remember, 50% of behaviors are untreated chronic pain. And you're really a decade older than what you think you are. So I'm 62, but I'm really in my 7th decade of life, not my 6th decade, which suddenly makes you feel terribly old. And then, what was the other thing that you said? When my mother thinks that I'm her mother, I'm recognizing that that's due to brain damage. And if I tried to convince her that I'm actually her daughter, all that's going to happen is I'm going to make her really agitated. And so I want to make sure I live in her reality because she has brain damage. She's not pretending she doesn't know me. That takes a 3-pound brain. She's just responding with what's still functioning. And so I always have to remember that it's not intentional. It's not meant to be hurtful, even if it is. It's brain damage. And it's such unique brain damage that it's how you build staging tools for dementias, because the dementias move in progressive and predictable manners. Each of the lobes does certain things. And so when that person begins to display that type of behavior, it means the disease is now in that lobe and there is no going back. So when I see a behavior, and I want to make sure everybody's having the best they can in this final part, is I always assess for pain, followed by assessment for depression, followed by assessment for anxiety, because those things we can easily treat. If I'm still seeing behaviors, now I need to do the brief psychiatric rating scale and check to see if the person needs an antipsychotic. And that is so that we can take this disease, and instead of your loved one's last part of life being this crazy up and down, properly medicated, the doctors can keep them as close to the person as they were that you knew. And also, we know they're not in any pain. And people's greatest fear is not dying, it's dying with pain. And as somebody with arthritis, my greatest fear is that somebody will not realize I have pain. So make sure I get my pain medicine too. And I know how much it hurts me. So I know it has to be painful for somebody who's much, much older. So all behavior has meaning. And when you want that person to have the best day possible, it means just going with the flow and doing the best that you can, because you're learning as you go along too of the best way to treat your loved one and what makes them feel soothed and comfortable, and what you've seen that makes them very agitated. And so it just varies greatly from person to person, just like we're all human, but we're all such unique people. So I hope that answered better.
Dr. Tam, I know our time is up, but I think Char's question might be one that other people may have. How should she respond when her husband thinks there are others in the room with them that aren't actually there?
Char should do the brief psychiatric rating scale. And that's the name of it. And you can find it on the tools section on the website, or you can just Google brief psychiatric rating scale, because that could be a psychotic feature, and we'd want the doctor to be sure to look at him. The other thing is determining whether the person is having a hallucination or a perception issue. So a perception issue is they're looking out the window and a car drives by and it makes shadow and light pass. Your brain looks at that and goes, car, shadow, light, big deal, and it throws it away. Their brain may begin to argue that somebody's over there. Thirdly, we need to see the doctor. And before you see the doctor, you need to go to lbda.org, which is Lewy Body Dementia Association.org, because seeing a bad person, somebody's in the house trying to get me, there's somebody there, that falls under the third hallucination of bad people are trying to get me, and it's a sign of Lewy bodies. So I would want to make sure that the doctor was aware that they're having that issue. So it could be perception. It could be a hallucination related to Lewy body dementia. It could be that their paranoia has increased, their suspiciousness and hostility has increased, and it's an antipsychotic is needed. So those are the three things you'd be looking at when you talk to the doctor.
Thank you, Dr. Tam. Christina says you are the best. And with that, I think we will call this a night and take all of this wonderful information and tools that you've reminded us to use and have a lot to think about.
Excellent. Wonderful. I look forward to seeing you guys in Wichita. That's going to be great. I'm actually going to slip into town on the 5th. So if you will reach out to Steve if you want to meet with me, Kelly, if you need to meet with me, anybody else, just let Steve know and we'll meet at the community and talk about your loved one and get you ready for the conference the next day. Good news, Steve, your books are on order. I will be bringing them with me. So my bad, but they're coming. Got it all covered. So looking forward to seeing you guys in person again. Thank y'all.
Thank you so much. Okay.